Well, good afternoon, everyone. All right. You know what today is? The 9th of Av. It dawned on me this past month or so that we were looking and studying some things, and so, you know, I've never realized, I don't think I've ever done a sermon on the 9th of Av. But then it dawned on me, I never looked for the 9th of Av to see if it was a Sabbath. So I'm going to bring you out some information that we've been putting together through News and Nuggets for the last few years, a little here and a little there. I'm going to make a full sermon out of it. And I want to bring you some interesting information and probably some alarm for the time we live in today. I think you're going to find today's sermon very informative on what God has laid out through the 9th of Av. So what is Tisha B'Av? Tisha B'Av. I've heard it pronounced several different ways. I don't know how close I got that time. But that's pretty close to what this video has. So what I'm going to do is I've got a little, about 3-minute video that kind of encapsulates what it is for the Jewish people. Danny, if you would you play that for us?
Every major ancient holiday on the Jewish calendar, even Yom Kippur, is ultimately about joy, except for one, Tisha B'Av. On this day, the 9th of the Hebrew month of Av, it's said that a series of major tragedies to the Jewish people occurred, including the destruction of the first and second temples. It's a day of mourning for getting kicked out of the land of Israel, for the destruction of Jerusalem, and the medieval expulsions from various lands. It's said that Tisha B'Av is the day when it all went down, literally. Sacred sites, entire communities, utterly destroyed, leaving a gaping hole in our collective soul. When life comes crashing down, we're left devastated. We cry, we mourn, we feel isolated. All natural responses to loss. Tisha B'Av is a day of mourning when the Jewish people acknowledge that no, life is not all butterflies and roses, and yes, this tribe has been through some serious suffering. The time prior to this day is known as the 3 weeks. The period starts with a fast on the 17th of Tammuz, when the siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE began, and intensifies during the last 9 days, when the walls were breached until the 9th of Av, when the ancient temple fell. The whole period is somber, and it's customary not to hold weddings during this time. Traditional Jews stop shaving, cutting their hair, and listening to music. During the 9 days, some also refrain from eating meat and drinking alcohol. The final day is Tisha B'Av, a 24-hour fast. In the evening, it's common to sit on low stools or the floor at synagogue and to hear the book of Eicha, Lamentations, chanted by candlelight. The book, traditionally ascribed to Jeremiah, brings readers on a graphic journey of the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. Silent sit on the ground the elders of fair Zion. They have strewn dust on their heads and girded themselves with sackcloth. The maidens of Jerusalem have bowed their heads to the ground. My eyes are spent with tears, my heart is in tumult. My being melts away over the ruin of my poor people, as babes and sucklings languish in the squares of the city. The melodies of the day are like a dirge, a time of reflection as Lamentations concludes, Hashivenu Adonai, turn us to you, Holy One, and we will return. Renew us as before. Following the reading, it's customary not to greet each other and to leave in silence, honoring the lives lost in the sacred space of introspection. When a dark history seems to follow an entire people around, it's only natural to ask why, or how could this be? Sometimes these questions are real, and sometimes they're more like a lament. Why me? Why us? How could this have happened? Eicha translates literally to how, as in, how could this be? Jewish thinkers have struggled to understand these questions for thousands of years. Historians see these as historical events where one nation overpowered another, but the rabbis understood them differently. In Hebrew, sinat chinam, baseless or useless hatred, was rampant throughout the land. The rabbinic tradition understood the loss of Jerusalem and the temple to be the divine consequence of the people's unethical behavior. That's why this day is also a time to consider improving our own words and actions in the world, especially how we treat others. Tisha B'Av comes in the midst of summer and yanks people out of that summertime and the living is easy feeling. The day invites Jews to turn inward and consider what it means to face national, spiritual, and individual darkness and loneliness. With a reflective heart, the next turn is outward, towards the light of life again, which renews a people's connection to God, to each other, and to the world. The spiritual turns of Tisha B'Av prepare the Jewish people for the biggest turn of the year, just 7 short weeks away, when the shofar calls our attention to Rosh Hashanah and the new year.
Interesting when you lay these things out, how God allowed all these things to take place on the 9th of Av, and literally 7 weeks before trumpets, before the return of Jesus Christ. All of these things all tie in together. And I wanted to share this with you because the questions come up, is that in the Bible as far as the day of worship, day of fast, and things like that. But first of all, let's show you on a calendar what we're talking about here. Tisha B'Av is generally in July and August, because you see our Roman calendar has 365 days and God's calendar has 360. So it's always floating around in different periods, and every so often there'll be a 13th month that the Hebrews or God would put in to keep the growing season in line with the cycles of growing seasons. So it is the 5th month in the Hebrew calendar, the 9th day of the 5th month. So that's what it is, and that's where it's located. This year it actually falls today. So it dawned on me just a few weeks ago, I said, well, I was speaking, and wow, it's on Tammuz 17. So well, that's very interesting, Tammuz 17. The first time we see the significance of Tammuz 17 in the Bible is when Moses is coming down off the mountain after receiving the tablets of stone, and the children of Israel had created a massive calf, a golden calf that they worshiped. So we remember that story. And it's interesting, I'm going to end this sermon today with another calf that had just been built that people using today in similar of worship like they did back then. It's interesting that it happened this past week, and I'm bringing it out on the 9th of Av. I don't think these things are by accident, that God lines these things up. So now, the 9th of Av is not in the Bible as far as a day of national worship. This is the day that the Jews have set aside as a day of mourning because of their history of what they went through. Similar to what we set aside for a day of joy for Thanksgiving or 4th of July or things like that. So they set this through as a day of remembering and mourning. It is the 5th month. This is Purim in the 12th month. And of course they have Hanukkah. These are the 3 Jewish holy days, as they call them, but basically holidays of the Jewish nation today. Right? So these are added that they keep, and they worship, and they keep each and every year. The Jewish holy days that are not in the Bible per se, although they have significance in our history, just like we go back in our history and remember certain things. But to really understand the importance of the 9th of Av, you have to understand the importance of the events as tied to the warnings that are given by God to Israel through Moses. See, that's where it all begins. And we find these in the chapters in the blessings and cursings, in Deuteronomy 28, with the blessings in verses 1 through 14, and the curses through 15 through 68. So now that would take up my entire sermon if I read all of those. So just make your little note, and if you haven't looked at those, go back and you'll see the progressive curses that God continues to bring when people don't listen, to try to get them to change. But there are 2 verses I want to read out of that chapter, verse 63 and verse 64. This is in reference to the fall of the temple. Verse 63. So it came to be that just as the Lord rejoiced over you to do good and to multiply you, so the Lord will rejoice over you to destroy you. Man, when you read that, it's like rejoice to destroy us. I mean, he really doesn't want to do that, but what he's doing is he's getting evil out to camp to destroy you and bring you to nothing, and you shall be plucked off the land which you shall go to possess it. Then the Lord will scatter you among all the peoples from one end of the earth to the other, and there you shall serve other gods, which neither your fathers have known, wood and stone. So when we look at these 2 warnings, we see in ancient Israel and Judah, when they split, all went through this process. And Israel was actually scattered, and still to this day are the lost tribes of Israel. In fact, when Jesus Christ took his disciples and he sent them out, who did he say? He says, I'm sending you to the lost tribes of Israel. So they were still there, just like at the end times they will be there when Jesus Christ returns. But they're scattered. We're in that stage now because we have not obeyed God. and it's going to happen again at the end time. There'll be another scattering coming forth. It is the removal of the spiritual Israelites to this day that we're talking about there. Now, the fall of Israel and the temple, the 9th of Av, is the final day of the 3 weeks of sorrow, or they call it the dire straits. Historically, the 9th of Av is the most cursed day in Jewish history. When I show you all the different events, you probably know some of them, but I think I can share some things with you maybe you haven't seen yet. A solemn day of fasting, prayer, and reflection on the most destructive events in the biblical history. It was interesting that in that video we heard that when they finish their service, people don't greet, they don't shake hands, they just quietly leave. It was a very solemn assembly. It reminds me of our Passover service, which is a very solemn assembly. We do the same thing. We close with the song, and then we just simply close our Bibles and we leave. It's not a time for rejoicing. It's a time to reflect on the solemnness of our renewed covenant with Jesus Christ in his death. Zechariah refers to the 9th of Av as the fast of the 5th, is the 5th month on the religious holiday. Zechariah, in the book it says the fast of the 5th, he's referring to the 5th month. Being now today, they understand it as a religious holiday or a holy day in their calendar. There are 5 primary calamities that they reference in their writings for the 9th of Av. So that according to the Mishnah, or the Tanit, it says the 5 specific accounts occurred on the 9th of Av. Now, for those who don't know what the Mishnah is, I brought this in. The Mishnah is the first major written collection of the Jewish oral traditions, also known as the Oral Torah. And quite often there's a big conflict between the oral law that they bring in versus the actual biblical law that we use today, we understand from the Bible. It is also the major work of the rabbinic literature. In the Greco-Roman period, the Mishnah fixes the days on which the tragedies befell the Jewish people were to be commemorated, the 17th of Tammuz and the 9th of Av, the fall of the temple in the New Testament, and 3 weeks later, the fall of, breaching of the wall on the 17th and the fall on the 9th of Av. So all of these things are commemorated every single week in Jewish law. So now, the 5 calamities. The first tragedy is this. The 12 spies sent by Moses to observe the land in Canaan returned from their mission, but only 2 of the spies, Joshua and Caleb, brought a positive report, while the others spoke despairingly about the land. Now, I didn't find the dates of this. I mean, I haven't done a great deal of research. It's probably, I don't think that it pulled this out of thin air, but I didn't have the documentation to support or to justify this. There must be something there, but I wanted to mention that to you in case you go looking in the Bible for it. You don't find it per se written out. Just like you won't find the 17th of Tammuz when they broke the stones written out, but you can count the times and the days, the 40 days and 40 nights from the time they went up into the mountain till he came down and he broke the stones because of the calf. You can put that on a calendar and you can accurately count it is the 17th of Tammuz. I have not had the time to go do that here. So if you have a chance, you might take a little study to go by and look at that. But anyway, this is the first tragedy of the children of Israel on the 9th of Av, that they wouldn't go into the promised land. The majority report caused the children of Israel to cry, to panic, to despair of ever entering into the promised land. And we know that story. All the people of children of Israel from 20 and up, none of them went into the promised land. They had to wander in the wilderness for 40 years till they all died, and then they finally went in. Amazing story that is. The second tragedy is the first temple built by King Solomon was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC. The population of the kingdom of Judah was sent into Babylonian exile. The first temple's destruction began on the 7th of Av. You see that in 2 Kings, and continued to the 10th, which you see in Jeremiah 52. According to the Jewish oral law and their tradition, it took 3 days to actually bring down, once they breached the wall, and that wall was breached on the 9th of Tammuz. So this period went on for almost a month before they actually brought the temples down. You have two different dates for bringing down the temple and the end of Jerusalem. And in those two dates, one you're showing, one is the beginning of the final collapse, and Jeremiah brings in the final collapse. Whereas the Jewish law believes that on the 9th day, before the 10th, began the final destruction, which is the day they represent as the 9th of Av, which actually destroyed the temple. So the point of all these references is that anything that's normally associated with the 9th of Av is not a good thing. I woke up this morning before I turned the TV on, before I did anything, and I prayed to God. I don't know if anything was going to happen today. I don't know if this is the time that God would begin to bring about his end. I know we have at least a period of years because certain things have not happened yet, but it starts somewhere. So I began to wonder, could this begin to start? One thing we know for sure, as I'll show you through some of my research toward the end of the sermon today, is that in the years where the 9th of Av falls on a Shemitah year and on the Sabbath, has never been good. I have never understood that till yesterday, or a day before yesterday. I was doing the research, and as I was researching, I said, you know, this was the first time I've ever spoken on the 9th of Av. Then I realized, like, well, wait a minute, I wasn't looking for the 9th of Av before 2015. Just so happened when I began to research 2015, I Shemitah year, it was on the Sabbath day. I said, well, that's interesting. I said, I wonder how often that happens. So I started going back for the last 200 years. And wait till you see the information that I've got and how bad it was on those years. I'm going to do that when I close out today. According to the Talmud, the actual destruction of the temple took place on the 9th of Av, and it continued throughout the burning throughout the 10th of Av. So the burning began, and it just burned for like 2 days before it was all just destroyed. The third tragedy on the 9th of Av is that the second temple that was built by Ezra and Nehemiah, was actually rebuilt by them, was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, which scattered the people from Judea, commencing many of the Jewish exiles from the Holy Land that continued until even this day. The fourth tragedy, this one's a little less known by most people, is the Bar Kokhba's revolt. All right, the Bar Kokhba revolt. All right, this was the battle of the Beitar and the Bar Kokhba revolt. It says, during the Jewish rebellion, the Romans subsequently crushed the revolt and destroyed the city of Beitar, killing over 500,000 Jews. The civilians, approximately 580,000 on the evening on August 4th, 135, and at sunset, that was the 9th of Av. So you see, everything that seems to happen is like God allowed it to fall or take place on the 9th of Av. So when I see all that, I said, well, these things don't just happen without God allowing them to happen to us for a reason. So why is what is this going on? And when you get toward the end of days like we are today, wait till you see all the stuff that's lining up today. The significant events that tied to the 9th of Av in this fortress was an ancient terrace-forming village in the Judea highlands. Now, this is what you're looking at in that pictures up there that Danny's got up. That's the actual ruins of that fortress for that city. It was the last standing Jewish fortress in the Bar Kokhba revolt in the 2nd century, destroyed by the Roman army Emperor Hadrian in the year 135. That was one of the last revolts of the Jewish people. Following that revolt, the Roman commander Turnus Rufus plowed the site of the temple in Jerusalem and the surrounding area in 135. Now, the picture that we've got up there is showing the Jewish revolt, and that's been carved out of stone. Now, that picture sometimes is also associated with the temples falling. But this one here was literally, it's a little different than some of them, but they take this picture showing that revolt and they move it into the fall of the two temples. Now, let's pull out some nuggets from all the tragedies. These are some of the nuggets that we put together in the last few weeks from News and Nuggets. I want to take all that information now. Let's put it to where it has some significance for you and I. You never can go wrong if you understand history, especially when God's laid it out on specific times and dates, because God says at the appointed time He allows things to happen. So here's a connection of the two temples to you and to I, and bringing us now to the end time. So the connections come by way of warnings. Look at Jeremiah 1, verses 1 through 4. The word came to Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, stand in the gate of the Lord's house and proclaim there this word and say, hear the words of the Lord, all of you Judah, who enter at these gates to worship the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, amend your ways and your doings, and I will cause you to dwell in this place. Do not trust in these lying words, saying, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord are these. Now, why would he say that, the temple of the Lord? Is because there came a feeling or an attitude, very similar like we have in America, that we're great, we're powerful, we have God on our side, there's nobody going to destroy us. So in Jerusalem, they began to say, we have God's temple. There's nobody can hurt us. You know, there's not a soul can stop us. We have the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. And you'll see that today with people. It's like when you saw the Twin Towers when they came down in 2001. And everybody got together and they began to talk about, we're going to rebuild stronger. Well, that lasted for about a week. And then it was back to the paganism as always. But it was that we're going to build back, and they even opened the Bible and they read scriptures out of the Bible. And they had all the different religions up there because you had to be equal opportunity religion. So here we have Jeremiah 7, verse, I hit the button there, so, all right, so now, okay, let me go forward now. Jeremiah 7, 5 through 7, I'm going to summarize it here. God says through Jeremiah, if Judah amended their ways, they would live in their land forever. Of course, the people didn't amend their ways, and they went around saying, temple of the Lord. We got the temple of the Lord. And every Sunday here in America, you go across America, and the churches, they're filled with people. A lot of the Protestants who've gotten away from mainstream religion, they're more into either a Pentecostal or a modern movement type of religion. They're building churches that hold 5, 7, 10, 15,000 people. Massive buildings across America. While the nation gets more evil and move further and further away from the God. And so you have the warnings like with Jeremiah. We have the temple of the Lord. Look what we've got. Look what we've built. There's nobody can hurt us. And in 8 through 15, going on, summarized again, but if Judah trust in lying words, continue in their sins and worship other gods, they will be removed as their brother Ephraim. So think about that. So when you hear our politicians and they want to get up there and start spouting religion, and I tell you what, there's not a lot of things that makes me more sick here than that. When you see the politician, I'm not trying to get in pro or left or right here. I'm talking about politicians in general. They'll get up there and they start quoting religion where they just fought a law to pass to kill babies and promote homosexuality, and get up there and start talking God. How much more sickening can it be? But that's what we have. That's the nation we live in today. Unbelievable, but it's true. Then he goes on in verse 12. He says, but go you now to the place that was in Shiloh, where I set my name at first, and see what I did to it for the wickedness of my people. So when we look at that today, and people think that we're impregnable, we have God, nobody can touch us. God's telling us, go look at my temples. Go look what I did in the Old Testament to my temple. Go look at what I did in the New Testament, and remember Shiloh, because that's where he first met with his people, and he allowed it to be destroyed. So while they're out there saying, temple of the Lord, temple of the Lord, temple of the Lord, God's saying, don't say that. You go and see what I did. In other words, don't call my name and disrespect me and disobey my laws, is what God was saying. And God had these temples fall on the same time, in the same day, on his calendar, on purpose, to drive his point home. And he wants us to remember that every single year. Don't forget what I did. If you want to live in the land, then you live the way I tell you to live, or you will be destroyed. It is the same message for you and I today. That's what we're looking at today. And that's why today was so, I didn't even know how to approach today sometimes. When I just had such reverence and understanding to what God had done and how much he's left in hidden for his church to be able to pull out and use and understand for these end times. It's just absolutely amazing. The two temples fall. Now watch this. So we got the first temple and we got the second temple. Now, instead of going through all of these, and you can do that at home in these verses, I just want to bring out something to show you what God did and how he lines everything up and warns us, and it's all put out there perfectly. And this is in Jeremiah. He says, in this house which is called by name became a den of robbers. Now, that's from Jeremiah. So now look in Matthew 21, he says the fulfillment come through here when Jesus Christ went into the temple. He says, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves. Here it's shown what has happened, and Jesus saying what will happen. Same thing, robbers and thieves. It is the fulfillment of that temple. So as I'm going through this and I'm looking at the timelines we've been working on in the last 7 years, and I look at the duality of events, and the focus forward from a shadow event to a fulfillment event, we know that this is coming again. We know that there will be a time before Jesus Christ returns that this will take place one more time. So you begin to ask yourself, will it take place on the 9th of Av? All right, so stick with me. I'm going to show you. I'm going to start putting some things together. It's absolutely amazing. All right, so now, the warnings. The first temple and the second temple warnings. 1 Kings 9, verse 8. It says, and at this house which is high, everyone that passes by it shall be astonished and shall hiss, and they shall say, why has the Lord done unto this land, unto this house? In other words, how could God happen? We had the temple of the Lord. The temple of the Lord. We had it. What happened? Well, in the second temple, Matthew 24, Jesus is talking to his disciples. And his disciples came to show him the buildings in the temple. He says, Jesus, wow, look at these buildings, Jesus. They're everywhere. Look how big they are. And Jesus says to them, do you not see all these things? In other words, what are you looking at? He says, assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down. So they're looking at this majesty of Herod's temple, the rebuilt, and it's bigger than ever. And he's saying, no, you don't look at that. You look at what's going to happen. In Luke 21, verse 20 and 22, he said, but when you see armies surrounding Jerusalem, know this, its desolation is near, for these are the days of vengeance and all things which are written to be fulfilled. And we see that coming to pass in Revelation 16. So the seventh angel pulled out his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne saying, it is done. And there were noises and thunderings and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such a mighty great earthquake, such had not been since men were on earth. And we know this, all of a sudden everything shakes. And Jerusalem breaks into 3 pieces at that time. And Jesus says, that's coming. When will this take place? So I ask again, could it happen on the 9th of Av in the future? Now the great city, which was divided into 3 parts, the city of the nations, fell. Another warning, all of that on the 9th of Av. The warnings. Is it possible that God will bring about or allow Satan to bring about the next major collapse of the future on the 9th of Av? As I woke up this morning, I said, well, what events taking place today that we don't know about? What evil has bestowed this earth that God will bring to our memories or our understanding in the days, the weeks, the years ahead that actually took place on this day that we don't know about? What behind-scene meeting where whispers are going in to all the dignitaries and the leaders and the kings on this day of disrespecting God at his throne that God will be judgment for? This year, the 9th of Av falls today, August 6th. An amazing, amazing thing. Hosea says, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I will also reject you, and you shall be no priest unto me. Seeing you have forgotten the law of your God, I will also forget your children. We look at our children today. There's no end to the attack, the assault, the abuse. Even now, where they want to open the borders and allow all the illegals come through. And I tell you, your heart goes out if you listen and you talk to some of those illegals coming through. Because they're looking for a better life in many of those cases. Many are not. Many are the cartels. They're carrying drugs. I understand all that. But there are many families and kids. There's no place for them in their homes anymore. And there's even a place now, they call it the rape tree. I don't know if you've heard it. I didn't know if I wanted to bring that out here. I'll just go very quickly through that. Where the cartels, they challenge one another, who can rape more women and children, as they march through on a march to America for a new life. When you see the things, when you pray, you got to pray, God, please come back quickly. Because you listen to them and they hope, they're looking for a better life. And this world's not going to give them a better life. The drug cartels are making billions and billions of dollars. And what we have actually done by opening those borders like they are today, you're destroying this nation and you're putting millions of people in harm's way and making rich the evil and the lawlessness of the land. And the governments in Central and South America are promoting it and allowing it to happen. Billions and billions of dollars continues to flow. The 9th of Av today. Now let's take a look at a few of the lesser known days of events that happen on the 9th of Av. And I believe what I'm about to share you now, basically, God has reserved for His church. Because a lot of people don't understand the truth that God's given to us, because God has given us the understanding of His Sabbath and His holy days and the plan of salvation of the 7,000 years. When you understand that, you've got a beginning point to begin rooting into the understanding that God has hidden. And that's why God says they'll hear, but they won't hear. They'll see, but they don't see. They won't know what they've got standing right before them. And so I want to begin sharing some of those things. This is the one piece of the puzzle that most of the people in Christianity and the Jews have not understood to this very day. This is the event connected with the 9th of Av. 2 Samuel 7, verse 10. Moreover, I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and I will plant them, that they may dwell in a place of their own and move no more. When God told that to David, now you've heard me tell you this before, we need to keep this in mind and bear with me, because each time we do this, we build in another piece of a puzzle being revealed to His church. The churches of this world do not understand this. The Jews today do not understand this one verse. When God gave David that verse, when God told him that, he was in the promised land already. He's in the land today where the Jews say, this is Israel, this is Judah, this is Jerusalem, we're home. No, God says, when you're there, I'm going to move you, you're not going to stay there. Because you see, God had a greater plan. It hadn't all been fulfilled. That's why people don't understand Revelation chapter 12. Because they misunderstand that the movement that God was taking them to. Now, let's take a look at some of this. How did God do that, by the way? Well, some of it began here. Now, we showed you, and I'll show you again just real quickly in some of the persecution. This was the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. It's called the Alhambra Decree, which was issued on March 31st by Fernando and Isabel, which expelled all practicing Jews from the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon and their possessions. They had spent about 10 years trying to get rid of the Jews. They wanted them out of Spain. Anywhere God's people go, you know they get blessings because they obey God. There's laws out there. God says, if you do this, you'll be blessed. You do this, you'll be blessed. Well, when people follow God's laws, they turn around, they're blessed. Well, the people who don't follow God's law, they're jealous. They're saying, how come he's getting ahead of me? Well, the Jews were those people. They were being, everywhere they went, they seemed to be taking over the banks, the finances, the wealth, the income, and so the rest of the world hates them. Isn't that amazing how God does that? Well, anyway, they had to get out. When they finally got them kicked out, also known as the Edict of Expulsion, it was issued March 31st, 1492, and it was effective from July 31st. Anything happened in 1492? Everybody laughing. Yeah, Columbus sailed the blue, remember? What was that scripture I just read about God talking to David? I'm going to move you again. Well, here is the movement taking place now. But watch how it took place. Watch this. By August 1st, the last of the Jews were on the road out of Spain. All right, so they had to be out. Right? They had to be gone. August 1st, they were out. August 2nd, Columbus' final preparations began to sail. They were made ready. So now, what is the day between sunset on the 1st and August 2nd? The 9th of Av. So God takes a curse and he turns it around to bring a blessing. But he does it on the 9th of Av as a warning. Don't forget where you came from. See, this is not a good year for the Jews. They've been expelled. But there was hundreds of thousands of them had nowhere to live. But at the same time, God was bringing about the fulfillment of his plan. All right? So now, on August 3rd, Columbus began his journey to the New World. Isn't that amazing? All of these things, for decades, they were trying to get the Jews out. Finally, they forced them out. And when did they go? They finally started building to final preparations to go to the New World to fulfill God's plan on the 9th of Av. By sunset, all the plans were ready. The next morning, before daylight, Columbus was on the road. He was heading across the seas. Now, it gets even more exciting. In that journey, just 2 months later, he lands. It wasn't America, it was one of the islands. I don't remember what the name of the island is. San Salvador, I think it was. But anyway, somebody might know that. He lands, when he steps foot on land, dry land. 2 months later, 1492, that day was the 7th day of the Feast of Tabernacles. Wow, what a coincidence. What did we hear in that video today, 7 weeks later? Is trumpets, right? A week after that was well, actually, I think it's 15 days later, becomes the Feast of Tabernacles. That night, the evening at sunset, began the last great day. He steps foot on the new world, the last day of the feast, kind of like us going to the new heaven and the new earth, Jerusalem coming down out of heaven. And what day did it end up with by sunset? The last great day, which is the 8th day of the feast. What is 8? New beginnings. I don't think this is any accident, by the way. You couldn't have planned that if you tried. There was no way, because that was their first journey. They didn't know how long it was going to take them, where they were going to be. In fact, they were driven off course. Chances were that if he stayed on course, he wouldn't have made it in time for that day. So I said, wow, these things are amazing. I don't know how you feel about it, but when you see stuff like this, I mean, you got to, doesn't your spirit just jump to see what God's put together? How all this comes about? Now, let's take a look at a few things that we've been going over, and now we bring in another piece of a puzzle. There's our calendar. All right, there's a Hebrew calendar on the left, and there's our Roman calendar on the right. Now, we've been covering this last couple of weeks. We had it in News and Nuggets and in the sermon, but let me bring out one more time here to bring another piece of puzzle in. In the Hebrew, 1776, the 17th of Tammuz was July 4th. And just like with Columbus, our nation was founded with a warning. Like, if you ever forget me, remember the temple of the Lord, remember what I did in Shiloh, remember what I did with my temples. So here's what we're looking at. On the calendar today, the 26th anniversary, this is when I brought this out a couple weeks ago, we see that that date that we brought out, July 4th, was actually the second of when God was bringing about his plan on Tammuz 17. We thought we were going to have our Constitution on the 2nd of July in 1776. But as we just saw on that calendar, July 4th was Tammuz 17. God held all of that off. They approved a plan for that to take place on June 7th, that they would begin their initiation on July 2nd. It said that these colonies are and right ought to be free and independent states. 2 days later, the body adopted the more well-known Declaration of Independence, which would be July 4th, which justified the deed by declaring the causes which impel them to separate. Remember this? This was with the drafting. This is where John Adams wrote on the 2nd, not the 4th, that was going to be the day that everybody was going to celebrate. Here's what he said. I'm apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as a great anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated as the day of deliverance, as solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. When? July 2nd. But God said, no, I got another plan. You're always going to go back to your roots, and you're always going to remember the warning on the day you began. It is a day of calamity for my people if you ever walk away from me. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade and shows and games and sports and guns and bells and bonfires and illuminations from one end of the continent to the other from this time forward forevermore. What day? July 2nd. No. They had something wrong with it. They had to go back and rework something. It took them 2 days, and it came out on Tammuz 17. So now, God brings about his warnings to Israel, keeping us on his timeline, in his schedule, on his calendar, not ours. Absolutely amazing. Why? What was the warning to Israel when they first started? Remember that golden calf? That was Tammuz 17. You look back and remember what happened to them. So don't let it happen to you now on Tammuz 17. I think that's why Satan has created such a calendar that God's word is hidden, because if we knew the days on the calendar in Hebrew and we worked with them all the time, I think it would keep us more focused to God, don't you? I know it is for me. So nowadays when we sit down, when we plan our news nuggets and insights, we sit down when we finish, we look at next week, we look at events. What do we say? One of us has a calendar on the Hebrew calendar. What day is that on the Hebrew calendar? What event happened on that day? And we check and we schedule and we look to tie in the events on God's calendar to the events that's happening today to see if there's any significance. And it keeps us closer to God's word. Even George Washington, God put in George Washington, in his members, he may not have understood everything we understand today, but he was a God conscience, and he came about with this. Since we ought to be no less persuaded that the perpetual smiles of heaven can never be expected on a nation that disregards the eternal rules of order and right which heaven itself has ordained. He may not have understood that July 4th was Tammuz 17, but God inspired in his mind that if we ever walked away from God, we can never expect his blessings. That is the warning that God gave us through Jeremiah and through Isaiah and Ezekiel and all his prophets. That's the times that he warned us of all those events that fell on the 9th of Av in Tammuz 9 and Tammuz 17, and he warning that if you're going to do that, you're going to live the same way, you're going to die the same way. So all those warnings that God had given for this nation. Tammuz 17 this year, it actually fell just a few weeks ago. On God's calendar, Tammuz 9 fell on July 8th. Tammuz 17 actually fell on a Saturday, was July 16. I spoke on that day. I said, well, that was amazing. You know what? When I spoke that day, I didn't look forward 3 weeks to realize that this was going to be the 9th of Av. Just the other week, I said, wow, I'm speaking on the 9th of Av. And I said, I don't think I've ever spoken on the 9th of Av. But I never looked for the 9th of Av to know. So that opened up a whole wealth of research now. So what am I sharing with you? I want you to do the same thing. I want you to take this information that God opens up to us, go to God in prayer, ask him to open your mind, and sit there very quietly and begin to look in his holy word. Let him take your mind and go through his archives of information and knowledge and let him fill you with his Holy Spirit. And he will. He absolutely will. So now, let's begin to bring in some of the things that I began to see this past few days. From 2015, when I went back 7 years, I thought it was kind of ironic that the months and time was different on our calendar, but they fell on the exact same days 7 years ago that they fell this year. Then I realized that this is a Shemitah year. 2015 was a Shemitah year. So now I got another piece of a puzzle I didn't put together before. So now I've got 2 Shemitah years where the 9th of Av fell on the Sabbath following one another. Not only did I not know that, I didn't know that existed. How about you? A lot of no's. We never, you know why? Because we hadn't looked at that before. But here's what I believe God's doing for his church today. He's opening up events that help you and I in our time. We need this today to keep us focused for what's going on. So now let's go a little further. There's Tammuz 9 and there's Tammuz 17 on our calendar. In 2015, the Supreme Court approved same-sex marriage. What a disaster. And it came about on Tammuz 9, the breaching of the wall in the Old Testament. It just so happened that July 4th, the Declaration of Independence fell Tammuz 17 that same year. What was the warning? We saw the warning. George Washington said, if we ever move away from God, don't expect blessings from God. We live all the way back now. We go back to the temples. And God says, if you want to know what I'm going to do, go to Shiloh. Don't give me temple of the Lord, temple of the Lord. What God's showing us through all of this, he says, I'm bringing about your destruction. You need to repent. And he's given us time. He's giving us time. The warnings are there. You can't make this up through thousands of years for these events to fall on these days. It's impossible. No one else can do that but God on his time calendar. And the amazing thing is it all falls according to his calendar, which was built from the skies and the circulation of the moon and the stars from before the recreation of this earth. God planned all this. How great is that? If we can't reverence a God who can do this, and here's the amazing thing, you and I have been called and opened our minds to reveal this to you. Don't take it lightly. This is God talking to you through his holy word, what he's revealing to his church today. Is that not exciting? It's also terrifying if you walk away from God. On God's calendar, the nation and our independence was declared, Tammuz 17. You can't make that up. All these things that come about. How am I doing on time? Oh, I'm in good shape. I'm in good shape. All right. How about this? The 9th of Av. Now, look, I'm going to show you what I did. Keep that up, Danny. I'm going to show you. When I put all this together on that map, what you're looking at for the calendars, I brought it to where I focused on Tammuz. I didn't think about the 9th of Av 3 weeks ago. It was the furthest thing from my mind. Now, watch this next click. Keep it up, Danny. Watch. There it is. You see, I'd cut it off when I went and pulled the Tammuz out because I was focused on Tammuz. What God had reserved on 9th of Av, I hadn't even considered yet, what I'm sharing with you. Last week, I didn't say this to be funny. I said that I'm speaking next week on the 9th of Av. I said, stay tuned, because I said, I have no idea what I'm going to be talking about. Y'all remember that? Everybody laughed. I was serious. I didn't know. I had to go to my desk and said, okay, what do I talk about on the 9th of Av? I didn't know. Well, I was waking up in the middle of the night. I was getting up early in the morning. I couldn't sleep. I was so excited. There was so much stuff. Now, look at some of the other events on the 9th of Av. August 2nd, 1941, the SS commander Heinrich Himmler formally received the approval for the Nazi Party for the final solution, a central element of the Holocaust, which began almost 1/3 of the Jewish population perished. Almost a third. You know, when you go to Revelation, I saw this today. I didn't go back and have a chance to look. In Revelation, it talks about a third of mankind. If you remember back in the Old Testament, when Satan tried to kill all the male babies, when God came back and when he brought the children of Israel out, what did he do? All the male babies. It's almost like Satan killed 1/3 of God's people, And God, in turn, is going to take in revenge on Satan to take a third of mankind. I don't know for sure that that's going on, but it sure sounds plausible. All right? So when I look at this, I'm beginning to see, this is a sidetrack, I know. I'm looking at the new brown shirts and 80,000 IRS agents coming. And I think back a few years ago, and they went after the Tea Party, remember? They found them guilty. I'm not worried about the point hiding the taxes as much as who they're going to go after. And I'm going to tell you something. When they're after you, you don't have enough money to fight them, and they can create and say whatever they want to do, and your days are numbered unless God intervenes. Don't take this last bill lightly, what's going on right now. This is serious. It's going to affect a lot of people. All right, going on. The Warsaw Ghetto deportation, July 23rd, 1942, the 9th of Av. See all these events that fall against God's people on the 9th of Av? The deportation of the Jews from the Warsaw Ghetto began their trip to extermination camps in Treblinka. Within 7 weeks, 7 weeks, where did we hear that today? Before trumpets. Before trumpets came, 300,000 were taken to Treblinka and gassed. 7 weeks. Here you have in type, before the return of Jesus Christ coming, before trumpets, before the sounding of Jesus Christ comes back, a type that the escalation and the killing is going to increase. Started on the 9th of Av. How about this one? The Sabbath day, the 9th of Av, and the Shemitah. Let's put them all together. I remember now, I was putting together my timeline. And on the timeline, I said, okay, the Shemitahs. Then it dawned on me, well, God says he increases 7 times. And if you don't listen, 7 more times in punishment. And so when we went back over the timeline, I put the 7 times in, they all lined up. And I said, well, could it be on a Shemitah? Well, now we're putting one more thing to the puzzle. The Sabbath day. Remember the Sabbath day? Look at this. I went back 200 years trying to find how often does the Shemitah, the Sabbath day, and the 9th of Av fall at the same time. I went back, and these are the ones that I found so far. The War of 1812, the Battle of New Orleans. That year, the battle about sunk the nation financially. I'll show you that in just a second. That fell on a Sabbath, a Shemitah year, in the 9th of Av, the war. 1819, it was called the crisis that nearly brought down the nation. By 1819, just 7 years later, because of the following the war that ended in 1815, the nation was so broke it was deteriorating. So the banks got together and they funneled out tons of money in loans and stimulate the economy. I said, wow, that's what we're doing today. Inflation grew, debt grew, people couldn't pay their bills. That's what's going on right now. People can't pay their bills. So they're getting ready to pass another $1 trillion of money they're going to pump into this nation. The thing that caused the inflation to begin with, that's getting ready to happen again, another $1 trillion. But that's okay, we're going to tax you, we're going to get it back. Oh, good, you're going to tax us. So we get the inflation, then we get taxed and pay it back. Whose side are you on? Certainly not ours. That just about collapsed this nation. And it took a long time to recover from that. That was a Shemitah year, a Sabbath day, and a 9th of Av. So we go forward, 1926. Well, that was 50 years from the Declaration of Independence. Something interesting happened on that 4th of July. 2 signers of the Declaration both died on July 4th, 50 years from their signing. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. It was an anniversary date of July 4th, picturing freedom of our nation. 2 of the nation's founders who fought for the freedom of this nation both died on the July 4th. I thought that was interesting. I don't know the actual significance of this, but the nation wasn't in good shape when that happened because they went into massive fighting after that. Here's another one. We go all the way up now to 1917. How about that? We enter World War I. U.S. at war with Germany, President signs the resolution. 1938, Shemitah year, 9th of Av, Sabbath day. the beginning of World War II. Isn't that amazing? Whenever I found these dates, there was never a good year. Sometimes it wasn't a good day, but it never was a good year. So let's move that out the way. Now, how about 1924? Believe it or not, that was a Shemitah year, a Sabbath day, and the 9th of Av. So what in the world happened then? That was Hitler's first try to take over Germany. There was a battle, several people were killed, and he was put in jail. He was let go 9 months later, or 8 months later. He was let out, and he began to raise up the Nazi Party, 1924. 1931, he began to take power. That was 7 years later. 1938, the war began, World War II. Had he never been let out, that couldn't have happened. He began the first persecution of all of God's Jews at that time. Let's not forget, when we look at the events that's going on today, China shooting rockets over Taiwan, not around, the blockade around them, Nancy Pelosi out there flaunting, saying how wonderful things are. By the way, they never did say what her mission was. Why don't somebody ask her, what are you doing there? No, all they say is, well, she has a right. She's a congressman. She can go and do whatever she wants to. No, she can't. She's on a government-funded airplane on your dollar. She has to account for what she's doing. Nobody's asking her. And I thought about that. I said, well, you know, the assassination in World War I only took one shot. One guy died. World War I began. These rockets going over Taiwan. What if one of them goes off base somewhere and lands in some place in Taiwan, and now we're in World War III? It only takes one event. When that starts, don't ever expect it to stop till Christ returns. Do you realize the time we're living in today? That's why I prayed when I woke up this morning and said, wow, what am I going to find when I turn on that television? Thankfully, nothing so far. How about this? In our most recent dates. 2001, 2008. I found this quite interesting. Both of them began at sunset. Not today, but at sunset, in the 9th of Av. Those are 2 Shemitah years, by the way. The breaking down of our walls, from Isaiah, as God warned us, and the financial crisis of 2008. Now, in all of my research back 200 years, I never seen more than 3 times in a row that they fell on the Sabbath. But watch what I'm going to show you now. 2015, 22, 29, and 36, all Shemitah years, 9th of Av, all fall on the Sabbath day. I went back 200 years, I couldn't find that. We've got 6 events, either on or at sunset of the Sabbath, the Shemitah year and the 9th of Av. I don't know how God lined up the calendar to do that, but it's there. You can go prove it out for yourself. It is there. I double-checked this before I brought to you. I said, that's impossible. But it's not. Let me show you something else that happened. When the temple fell in 70 AD, it was a Sabbath, it was the 9th of Av, and I don't know if it was a Shemitah year, though. But it was a Sabbath day when it fell, and it was on the 9th of Av. That's interesting. So now, Matthew 24, 20 says this, pray that your flight be not in the winter and neither on the Sabbath day. Isn't that interesting? Could be 2029, be the time that God brings about the fall of Jerusalem and that earthquake and it breaks into 3 parts. I don't know. Could that be in 2036? If God lets us go that long. I don't know. But what I'm showing you today is these events that are lining up are terrifying. If you can't pay attention to what's going on here, then God has not to put the fear of his word in you yet at all. Now, this is my last slide. I'm going to end with a video, and I'll come back and close. This thing Audrey found this morning and sent it to me, and I was at my desk feverishly putting this together. They call them the Commonwealth Games in Great Britain. I'm going to play the video, and I want you to remember the beginning of Tammuz 17. God calling Moses to his mountain for 40 days, coming down, revelry in the camp, throwing the tablets, and God killing the people who were worshiping this bull. This was about 2.5 minutes long. This just took place this week. Let's play that video. Stun you? I still don't know how to accept what I just saw. I debated whether to even bring that in today or just save it for news and nuggets. I think it's appropriate on the 9th of Av to bring that to you. All those women behind him, I heard there was another video where everybody's kneeling also. But in Baal worship, they have the priestess, the women. And all those women are following Baal as they're going forward. That was Baal. And you see them bowing their heads before Baal. And everybody giving homage. And I thought about that with Moses and the tablets. Then I thought about Nebuchadnezzar and his giant statue, either bow down before me or be put in the fire, or be fed to the lions. And I'm thinking that I don't think we have that much more time. When you can do this in an arena of tens of thousands of people who are mesmerized by this pagan type of worship that's laid in front of them, not even realizing many of them what it was probably. That I believe that God's going to come back and this world will pay a price. So I wanted to bring that to you. As I said last week, I had no idea what to bring to you today. I hope that I've enlightened your minds and your thoughts to keep focused on what God has in store for us, to keep us reminded that we don't have to go that way, that we can follow our calling, and God will bring us His protection before the return of Jesus Christ. So when you go home tonight, you think about that. You think about this day, and keep your nose in the Bible.